Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Sausis. The purpose of yoga is to expand consciousness, so we can understand our position in the larger scale of existence. By asking us to visit the opposite extremes, for example through posture and counter posture, it recalibrates our actual position regarding the facts of life. It leads us from the personal to the universal and back to the personal. So once we acknowledge our dual nature as sacred animals, we can become and feel one with the whole. According to classical yoga texts, most of the problems in our health, whether physical or mental, come from a state of ignorance of who and what we are. By offering a vehicle of self-knowledge, yoga provides the opportunity to become acquainted with our essence, giving us the possibility of accessing self-knowledge that will enable us to change what we consider dysfunctional. This is remarkably similar to the definition of psychotherapy that psychology proposes. So, what are the ties? How can yoga aid psychotherapy and vice versa? To answer this question, I invited today Sophia Reinders. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you.
Sophia is a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, a body-oriented Jungian psychotherapist, and an expressive arts therapist. Sophia, our first question for you is, when did you meet yoga for the first time? What was your first experience with yoga?
My first meeting really was when I was about 18. My sister was already in college, and one day she came home and she had heard a guest lecture by an Indian yogi, and she had purchased his book, and so she came home and told me about it. And as I looked through the book, it was like, oh yeah, this is for me. Very interesting, and I did make it into a life path. I don't recall now, I sometimes wonder, what was the this that I understood in that moment? I enjoy just kind of musing about that, but in any event, this was for me. And so yoga has been in my life ever since.
Then, so your first meeting was through this book.
Yes.
Did you also experience yoga at that time, or your experience with yoga came later in a practice?
It came later. It began probably a couple of years later when I went to college and then went to find a yoga teacher. And so over the years I studied in a number of European countries with a number of different teachers, Hatha Yoga as they all called it. And then began a new chapter when I came to this country and I was introduced to Iyengar Yoga.
So Sophia, as I heard you say, you were already studying in college to become a psychotherapist?
No. I was studying to become a simultaneous interpreter. However, my real desire had been to one day really be a yoga teacher and to one day be a psychotherapist. But, for circumstantial reasons, yes, I could not begin it right there. So I took what looked like a detour, but of course we know there are no detours. So eventually I came to both.
And so how did the mix between psychology and yoga come to you? Or how come you were inspired to mix them two?
Yeah, well, you see, they each organically grew in me, and then they intersected. As I grew into yoga, what inspired me so deeply was, several things. Yoga, of course, has evolved within an understanding of the universe as an unbroken fabric of aliveness in which we are inextricably interwoven. every dimension of us, every dimension. So that to me was such a beautiful and essential image, because it bypasses, it is in a different dimension from the kind of dichotomizing body, mind, this and this, that the Western mind has gotten used to do. So that was very, very important to me. This vision of the unbroken fabric. And through the, you see, within yoga, of course, the vision of our embodied being as the 5 koshas, 5 different bodies. I like to call it different dimensions, because that invites less a separation and objectification. So different levels, from the physical level, so the body of the body, to the energetic level, the body of energy, to the mental, emotional level, the body of the mind, to the body of awareness. And then through the body of awareness, we can glean the unbroken fabric of being. So we can glean the mystery of being. And it always spoke to me so very much that stepping into, growing into, it's not a stepping, it's a growing into this visceral sense and knowing of life as a whole is not through in yoga, is not brought about by a mental step, but through awareness, which grows out of practice. You see, so this whole beautiful fabric of yoga, philosophy, and psychology is a fabric that evolves out of practice, and that is clarified through practice, and that is experienced through practice. Those were aspects that spoke to me very, very much. And initially, just side by side, grew my growing into psychotherapy, into Jungian psychology. I had read Jung's work as a teenager, and I believe what immediately spoke to me there also was Jung developed a very, very sophisticated image of our being, again through practice. And I have always trusted the body and an embodied practice. I've always trusted that much, much more than any edifice of thought, separate and divorced from the body. See, so Jung's vision of wholeness is again a very lived and embodied vision.
Why Jungian psychology precisely? And because and not only that, when I presented you, I said you're a body-oriented Jungian psychology. And not only Jung, when he separated from Freud, partially it was because he considered the body an important part of the being, as part of the identity, not just mental, but actually the body. And that was my question, whether this is what attracted you from that type of psychology for the mix with yoga.
I believe I might not have been so tuned into this initially. Those came with practice and discoveries. I believe initially his notion of unus mundus, one single world, is very much a similar arc from the arc of yoga and of the vision of yoga. And again, this arc is experienced through practice. The practice of psychotherapy, or the practice really of befriending the soul. And for Jung, the soul is never a disembodied soul. You see, the soul in any moment speaks with the body and through the body. You see, in this sense, he was the first expressive arts therapist, because he already knew how movement constellates the psyche, how movement brings the psyche into focus. you see. He also knew that our soul speaks in images, see, and so this arc of exploring and experiencing the embodied soul and the way the embodied soul speaks to us, you see, this holistic vision was what attracted me so much. And it was really what attracted me, I believe, initially to each of those fields. Now, they came together in a way unpremeditated, as a surprise. You see, of course, that's the beauty. If you commit to a practice, you commit to looking, then not searching, because if you search, you miss the obvious. But you commit to looking, you will see. You see? So, as I began my yoga teacher training, I had also simultaneously begun my training analysis to become a therapist. And I found, really initially to my surprise, that as I was engaging in an asana, much more happened than my physical sensations. So by lingering with a really friendly and very curious attention in the sensations, I noticed, whoa, images, feeling tones came up, like they offered themselves from inside the tissue. And I was flabbergasted because I instantly recognized the themes about which I would speak in my psychotherapy. But what struck me in particular beyond that was how the immediacy with which those experiences came to awareness, three-dimensionally. You know? And so I remember, as this process began happening, I realized that even though Jung, of course, always speaks and implies the psyche as embodied, I hadn't quite gotten that. So for me, the psyche was a bit ephemeral, and the past was like over there, somewhere in back.
Somewhere behind.
Yeah. And it was like, oh no, au contraire. You see, as I engaged in asana and lingered with the sensations, I realized that, well, the past offered itself. You see, in other words, the images and feeling tones that came were initially very much tied to wounded memories, wounded feelings.
In fact, this is a common happening in yoga classes, that a lot of people who are just going to a studio and apparently not necessarily intending to develop their awareness over their psyche, yet have emotions that show up. Sometimes they feel they could cry, or they want to cry, or they feel more depressed or super happy, and this comes from a particular asana, or of course from moving the tissue. So this is an experience that a lot of people have. I'm sure you've seen it too in your And you see, of course, that is precisely what yoga speaks about when they describe the five bodies of our embodied being. Right? So the ancient yogis, through their meditative attention and the awareness that grew from it, knew that that there is an unbroken dynamic of experiencing that spans the physical through the energetic, through the mental, emotional, into awareness, and through the awareness to. It's interesting always to me that in English the word is realization, because it's not an understanding. It doesn't go through the channel of the mind. It goes through the channel of awareness. But an embodied knowing of life as a whole and of the sacred mystery of life, really. You see, so they speak about that. And by golly, if you take this path, you will find that. You see? Now, you have studied Iyengar yoga. You're a certified Iyengar yoga teacher. Have you found that in your experience, Iyengar yoga fits better than other styles of yoga with Jungian psychology, or it just happened that you studied with Mr. Iyengar or Mr. Iyengar's methods, and then that's why you mix these two?
Well, you see, maybe a bit of both. I'm very grateful that I was introduced to Iyengar yoga, because I didn't look for it, I didn't know about it. So I was through colleagues and friends, when I came to this country, I was introduced to it. And in my first 2 classes were shocking to me, because it was like I had done yoga, you know, I practiced, I knew about yoga, thank you very much. Didn't want to be taught in the way that I was being taught. And then the third teacher comes in, you know, I had gone to try out different. Third person comes in was Felicity Green, by the way, who became one of my very important teachers. She walked in and I thought, whoa, there's my teacher. And that became true. And she was also one of the primary teachers in the Iyengar yoga training program. And so after a while, she suggested, you know, that I consider going this path. So you see what I find, and I'm very, very happy. There are so many aspects that touch me. One is that Mr. Iyengar always saw the practice of asana within the context of Ashtanga yoga. So within a perspective that looks both at the 8 limbs of yoga, and without going into, you know, of which a part is how do I situate myself in regard to the other? How do I situate myself in regard to myself? How do I live in my... So this is yamas and niyamas. You see this often mentioned as ethical principles. I would just call them embodied psycho-spiritual awareness, really down to earth. How do I go about being with others? How do I go about being with myself? How do I go about being with my body? You see? And then those meditative practices where I learn to dhyana, where I learn to use all my senses, but not in order to take me out into the world, but in order to sense into my embodied mental, emotion, spiritual experience. You see, so the turning of the senses to this exploration. So for instance, Mr. Iyengar says that asana is meditation in action. You see, so I like this very, very much. He is very embodied. He himself is very embodied. And the other aspect that I found and have always found very inspiring is the minute attention to detail of the entire body. For instance, when I came to Iyengar yoga, once I got over myself, like, I know this, thank you very much, and I could actually begin to learn. I was flabbergasted to find out that I knew a whole lot about my lumbar spine, my lower back, a whole lot. But my upper back, I realized, was like a stranger, you know, not a malevolent or unpleasant stranger, but I didn't live there. I didn't live there, you see. And so the way Mr. Iyengar, through in his own practice and then his teaching, directs the attention evenly to every aspect of the body and to the alignment of the entire body, like what is my big toe doing when my left arm reaches out, type thing.
Yes,
you see?
exactly.
It
yes.
really, that careful approach really fosters the ability to come home into our entire embodied being.
I see. Now, Jung spoke a lot about the collective unconscious and archetypes or prototypes for ideas. And I wonder if this shared knowledge or these shared images that we have, these shared concepts, are somehow similar to the knowledge yoga says we all come to this life with, and that sometimes it identifies with the order, with spirit, with God in some forms of yoga. Do you think there's a relationship between this collective unconscious and this other idea of spirit?
Yes, I believe so. I believe that in fact neither yoga nor Jungian psychology creates a rigid separation between psyche and spirit. The membrane right. that differentiates one from the other has a different shape in yoga from Jungian psychology. However, the archetype, Jung's insight into the archetypal psyche was an insight that we are not only, we are not only left to our own devices. We are not only an idiosyncratic consciousness with our idiosyncratic individual biography, but we participate by virtue of being alive. We participate in profoundly sensed and known ways of experiencing that we share with all humans. You see, and I believe that in many of his nature writings, even though he never said this, but I believe that he also had an intuition that we share this not only with all humans, but with life. I believe that the archetypes go beyond the human realm. But even if we were to look at them just within the human realm, it gives a very, very different sense of self, to open myself up to this knowing that beyond our individual differences, we could, you and I and all of us share a deep, deep, deep soul connection. Soul connection, not in a word, yes, not in a buzzword sense, but a profound way of being on this earth that informs us beyond and above our personal biographies, and that in fact holds really the treasure and the treasure of being, of our being and of being, because again, you see, it connects our individual selves to a viscerally experienced and encountered larger self, larger being. Yeah, and of course yoga does this, you see. Yes. And it's, when I studied the 5 koshas, initially the 5 bodies, and having already grown into Jungian psychology, I was fascinated with how the body of buddhi, the body of awareness, is the fulcrum where the two meet. You see, because transformation happens. Transformation comes about through awareness. I don't need to make transformation happen, just like I don't need to pull on a plant to make it grow.
To be aware.
So, you see,
yes. That's a good image.
You see, so the awareness is brought about through practice. Again, that's what inspires confidence in me. It's not through, layers and layers and layers of abstract thought built on top of each other. I can't do much with those systems of thought.
But what are some of the practices that you so appreciate in Jungian psychology?
In Jungian psychology, well, you see, the entire intent of Jungian psychology really is to blossom into your potential, to blossom into yourself, to come home into your own full being, just like in yoga.
Jung called this individuation, right? And this is a little bit of what you're talking about. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Again, well, individuation is Jung's way of describing this journey from a very limited sense of self, limited and isolated really, to a sense of self where I as a person become kind of become more transparent to myself, so really befriending the different aspects of my experience and of my being, and through this befriending, reaching quite naturally, growing into a sense of self that is no longer separate. You see, this is so hard to put in words, but the parallel, for instance, with yoga is again that by attending to my body, this body, attending to its strength and flexibility, to unblocking it, to refine my own attention, my way of paying attention, my senses. You see, so by really immersing myself into the experience of this embodied being, it is through this immersion, through this practice, that I reach the knowing of the togetherness of life. You see. Plus, this is something that's also that I hope we come back to later on. In the process, of course, I also quite naturally begin to experience this body here less as mine than as the gift of life. You see, the gift of life that takes shape of me here, it takes shape of you there, you see. So it's life, it is this unbelievable gift that we are, you see. And so this is, again, this path from attending to and really committing to the practice of coming home into our own individual embodied being. That is what leads us to knowing the togetherness with life. And for Jung, it is very similar. It is by creating more and more, creating a fuller and fuller relationship with all that I am.
Yes.
I quite naturally touch the truth of the shared psyche, of the shared psyche of humanity and the shared psyche of the earth.
Yes, which in a way is similar to the concept of yoga, where by knowing yourself, you know the whole.
Yeah.
I appreciate having you in the show very much. I thank you very much for having come today and for sharing with us your points and your perspective on these two fascinating worlds. And I look forward to having you some other time here with us.
Thank you. It's been a real joy.
Thank you.
I have very much savored our time together.
Thank you. Likewise, Sophia. My guest today was Sophia Reinders. She is a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, a body-oriented Jungian psychotherapist, and an expressive arts therapist as well. I hope you liked our show today. And if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time.